than the LS family, as the LS family is of the original small block. More specifically, because the last generation of the small block, you can look at it as the second gen LT1 stuff or of the VORTEC motors. Now, I'm going to be doing a video comparing an L31, a VORTEC motor, to an LM7, and it's interesting stuff. And you know, guys, I remember reading some comments from the VORTEC guys about how fantastic that head is and how it's the most evolved small block head and all of this stuff. And the reality is that it was made for a specific application, in this case, a truck application, and it works very well. And obviously the 706 head, the small valve LS head was made for the 4.8 and the 5.3 truck head, and it works very well. So it's an interesting comparison. I'm going to compare that, the L31 versus the LM7, and that will be an interesting comparison. But we know that the LM7 was rated at more power, depending on exactly which application it was, rated at more power than the VORTEC motor. And we also know that the L83 is rated at more power than the LM7. Now, there are other thing is, and I'm sure guys will bring this up, there are other versions of that 5.3 liter that were rated higher, especially the Gen 4 stuff. So there's a lot to talk about there. And it will be interesting because one of the other videos that I'm going to do after doing this one and showing people how we made 500, it will be an interesting comparison, because way back I did a comparison of the L83 versus the LM7 kind of in stock form. But now that I've made 500 with both of those, I'm going to put that video up too. So we're going to compare them stock and modified up to the 500 horsepower version. And it will be interesting to talk about how many modifications it took to reach that power level with both of these combinations, and what basically the L83 already has going for it. And obviously you guys know the L83, I mean, if you already have a 1.5 points more compression, that's going to go a long way. If it has VVT, but the Gen 4 stuff, the 5.3 was available with VVT as well. And I don't think we ever I certainly haven't totally taken advantage of that. Now, the guys at Brian Tooley Racing have run their 5.3 Gen 4 motor with VVT. And Brian said the same thing, that it seems to go a long way on the L83 version, but didn't seem to have the same kind of power gains when they were testing the Gen 4 VVT motor. So there's that to talk about. And obviously the VVT Gen 4 motor doesn't have the same compression. The other thing that it doesn't have, even though it is equipped with 243 heads, which are probably the highest flowing of all of the factory cathedral port heads, it still doesn't hold a candle how much the Gen 5 heads flow. Now, the Gen 5 head is obviously a lot bigger, at least from a port volume standpoint. It's more like a rec port head, and I think it's 248 cc's. Now, obviously, a measurement doesn't tell you everything about it either, because there's obviously not just cross section, there's length on the port as well. So in some applications, the intake has most of the length and the head has very little. So it'll measure a very small port volume when in fact it can be very big, and that can be deceiving as well. Then we have so we have VVT and we have cylinder head and we have compression. The other thing that happens is with the DI versus port injection. There's arguments both ways. The DI makes more power, the port injection makes more power from charge cooling. There's that whole argument, and it would be interesting to find a direct test where we could run 100% of one or 100% of the other and find out what they do without changing the rest of the components, because obviously we need to find out, does it work well with that piston design and that head design and all that, if we run just port injection and if we run just DI, and then is the compromise some sort of percentage combination with both of them, is that better? So that'll be an interesting thing. So what do you guys think about the difference between the 5.3 L83 and then the previous generation, either a Gen 4 or a Gen 3 5.3 liter? You'll take an LS7. A lot of guys asked about actually that intake manifold run on these motors. And I also have more testing coming up on the L86 and the LT1, the 6.2 liter, which the guys from Brian Tooley did a number of tests on. And it's kind of cool. In the next video, I'm probably going to do the stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 and maybe there's also a stage 4 camshaft on the 5.3 on the L83. And then they also ran each one of those with the L83 and the L86 intake. And there's a different amount of power depending on what camshaft they use. So it's a lot of really good stuff that we're and the thing that I love about Brian and the guys at Brian Tooley Racing is that they're curious as we are about running these different combinations. So that they don't mind like tossing stuff on there and testing them. So it's really cool. And then they're doing the 5.3 and the 6.2 versions, which everybody wants to know what both of them do. And then there's a big power LT1 L86 version as well. So it's very cool. Very, very cool stuff. So what do you guys have going on? Dart Engineering did a test for Chevrolet. They put 5.55 rods in cylinder 1. We did have to put 625 rods in cylinder 6. They put a dial indicator on each piston and then rotated the crankshaft. I don't know what you would be finding out rotating the crankshaft with a dial indicator by changing the rod length. I'm not sure what you're trying to find there. There is, Stephen, there is a lot of LT1 and L86, the 6.2 liter testing there as well. Both a number of different ported heads, the stock head, the different intake manifolds, and obviously lots and lots of different camshafts on that, and it responded very well. 5 is better than 4, and 4 is better than 3. And then so then is ICT Car Guy, is 3 also better than 2? Because you could have kept going there. And also 1. So did we just, as we go up in new generations, is it better? Jonathan, the L83 will make more power than your Gen 4 will. But and as I pointed out in this video, here's something to think about. The Gen 5 L83 has the least amount of piston to valve clearance of any of those generation motors, of any of those Gen 5 motors. The L86 and the LT1 are the same, so they have the same amount of piston to valve clearance. But because they wanted 11:1 in the L83, it has a really big dome. It would be like the big dome that they use on a DZ302 to get it to be 11:1 compared to the 327 and then compared to the 350, which had subsequently smaller domes than those because they had more displacement to achieve the same static compression. And it's the same thing with the L83. And unfortunately, you're limited in the piston or the cam timing that you can run on the L83 because of that piston design. You can get away with more camshaft on the bigger motors, which is interesting. Half fast, yes, you do have a difference in the buildup on the valves. You definitely have that, and GM on the LT5 went with a combination of the two. I think also because they're trying to get more power from it, but it would definitely help with the buildup on the valves, because if you have fuel spraying on the back of that, it just kind of washes that stuff off. Small block 4302 build versus a junk 6.0 for cost effective. There's no comparison there for if you are looking at power versus what it costs, because it would take a lot of money to make 302 ever make what a stock 6-liter does. It would basically take heads, cam, and intake manifold on a 302 to equal what a junkyard 6-liter does, like right out of the junkyard. I haven't done any testing with a 6.6 liter, although I talked to Brian about it, and I do want to do some of that. I would actually like to do a big bang on the 6.6. That would kind of be cool. I think the best bang for horsepower to pounds or horsepower to pounds ratio is the LM4. So you're looking at the horsepower per weight of the engine. The main disadvantage for the 5.7 compared to the 5.3 is that it's going to cost the same from the wrecking yard, at least it does in our. And it doesn't have as good a cylinder head. Although the VORTEC head, if you look at the flow rate, is very, very close, but it does not make the same power as a 5.3 does. The Gen 5s are not a lot more in the wrecking yard, at least in our wrecking yard. You just can't find them. It's real hard to find a Gen 5 motor. So that they probably, if you're out trying to buy them, they probably sell for more. Mario, I certainly hope so. I hope people come out with the fuel systems, more specifically the injectors and the pumps, so that we can run high horsepower stuff. Brian has a set of LT4 injectors and the pump, so we can hopefully do some stuff with that later on. And then with the cam lobe and then the feed of the feed pump, we can increase that too to get some power out of it. But the problem is you're going to want to run E85 on everything, and that limits the amount of power. Now you could run, you know, race gas, but it's really expensive. So the flow rate of all of that stuff with E85 kind of limits the amount of power that we can make. The LS swap is still, I don't think anybody's going to beat that for cost. I don't know if Eddie, I don't know if the sloppy stage 3 will fit on an LQ9. I don't know what the specs are on that cam because I never run one. Todd, which Edelbrock heads are you talking about? Is it the LT heads? If you're talking about the LT heads, I have not run that head yet. Okay, Jay Williams, the LM4, it's a 5.3 aluminum. You can find them in the 04 and 05 Trailblazer SS. I'm gonna think you're meaning not an LS, right? A Trailblazer SS. You can also find an LC9 and an L33. Those are also aluminum versions. God Nuts Racing, would you rather be given an L83 or an LQ4? I think an LQ9 would be an easier swap just because of the fuel system. But if you look at the test that I did, I compared the L83 to an LQ4 because that's what we had. And an L83 surprisingly makes similar power and torque compared to the LQ4. So it makes 6-liter power essentially because it has really, really good heads and it has VVT and all that. Now, I've never run an LQ9 or an LY6, which I'd like to compare it to. I ran an LY6 with a fixed cam, and it does very well. It makes more than the L83 does stock. Ralph, you put an LS1 cam in a 4.8. Yeah, that's a mistake. It's going to lose a ton of power. Take a look at the video that I have up where I tested all the stock cams, and you'll see why. It's going to lose a lot of bottom end. It's going to pick up at the top, but in my opinion, it's not the right choice for a 4.8. What does a stock L59 make in an 03 Suburban? I don't know. Is the L59 is that a 5.3? Yeah, you might be able to measure dwell time, but the dwell time is not going to tell you what the difference in power is, though. And the dwell time can actually be calculated. So you found that the LM4 was even cheaper than the L33 or probably the LC9 too. Those are kind of hard to come by. Is it possible to dyno an engine at low RPM? Yeah, you can chassis dyno because it's an inertia thing, but you're never at wide open throttle at 1500 RPM. At least I never am. And wide open throttle at 1500 is not going to tell you anything about, I mean, on drivability, but it would almost be better to test it at 50% throttle at 1500 and kind of see there. Actually, drivability is not really determined very well on an engine dyno. It's much better on a chassis dyno, and actually it's much better on the street. A 9th injector might work, but the problem with that is distribution in these long runner manifolds. A dry sump versus a wet sump, the power, especially if you have one of the scavenging stages producing vacuum. How do I feel about a 408 with 706s? I think it's going to limit the power of a 408. Sloppy stage 3, if it's a 238 on a 112, you're definitely going to need to check piston to valve clearance. John Wilson, on your math question, what you should do is get a vacuum gauge and mount it in the intake manifold or between the intake manifold or between the throttle body and the MAF, and see if there's vacuum there. If there is vacuum there, then there's a very good chance that you would benefit from a bigger air inlet or mass air. If you get a vacuum reading there, then it is a restriction, and then yes, you will benefit from it. Luis, the best upgrade for a C5 97. That's an LS1, right? So your best upgrade for any LS is to start with a camshaft. Cam and springs are the first thing. Long tube headers are good. Sometimes are a little hard to fit on a C5. But most guys go with the first things they do normally is a catback and an air intake and a tune. And then after that, a camshaft is going to give you the best gain. If that has a 95, if it has an LS1 intake, then you'd do well to put an LS6 or a better intake manifold on also. I use Strain TV. I always use studs. I use ARP head studs. Edelbrock Victor Juniors are the only aftermarket head for the Gen 5 LT. Does GM doesn't have anything? GM does make CNC ported LT1 heads, so we know that because we've tested those. But those might be ported stock heads though. Marcus, it depends on what you're going to do with that, whether I prefer an iron block or an aluminum block. If I was building a road race car, then I would want an aluminum block. And especially if I was at 1,000 horsepower or less, I probably would want an aluminum block. Although, if you're making lots and lots of power, you can run an L33 5.3 or an LC9 aluminum block and still make really big power. But all of our big bang motors have been iron blocks. Oh, the L59 was a flex fuel LM7. Okay, so that's still an iron block motor then? There will be a change in dwell if you change the rod length. If you go from a 5.5 to a 6.125, there's going to be a change in dwell at the top. Matt, you don't need a custom cam to make for wheel horsepower. You are going to need really good cylinder heads on that. You won't do that with a stock head because that's going to be 600 flywheel. So there are off-the-shelf grinds that will do that without any problem. And what you'll find is if you get a custom cam, it's going to be really close in specs to a off-the-shelf cam because that's where they all started. The Nova's in the backyard. What can I do with a VORTEC 7400 with TBI? You can put a small camshaft in it, put headers on it, you put an air intake on it. You can port the heads, although the throttle body ultimately is still going to kind of be the restriction. But you don't have, if it's a VORTEC 7400, then it's a 96 to 99, and that's not a throttle body injection. If it's an earlier than that, then it's a Gen 5 motor, and it will have throttle body injection. Casey, for a 408, the best stock casting you could put on there would be a rec port, like an LY6, an 823 or an 821 head. Yeah, Andy, they won't be able to measure just they can't just measure at NEC. They're going to have to measure probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 degrees before and 5 or 6 degrees after, kind of. I think it's going to be better just to use the math to figure it out. Geo, I don't know about the injector difference between, and if it's a flex fuel, then you'll definitely have different size injectors. John, I don't know about cold air systems. I haven't run a test on those in the car, and you'd have to do that in the car. We almost never run the cold air setups on the dyno. Can I use an air to water intercooler? Are you asking, Strain TV? Yeah, between the high ram, yeah, you can, as long as it fits under the hood, because it's pretty thick. So I don't know what hood it'll fit under. Mark, I don't know what the specs are on the VVT LY6 cam. I don't have any idea. Maybe look at on All Cylinders on the Summit website. They might have LY6, although they don't seem to have a lot of the VVT cam stuff. And I don't know anybody that's done one of those. It's kind of hard to get exact specs unless you get them from GM. Working on porting my H22. The one thing I can tell you, Tom, is to not take too much material out of that. Honda did a really good job on those heads, and what people tend to do is overport them, and I've seen them get worse from stock. The J. Williams, the LM7 is not aluminum, it's iron. The L33 is aluminum, and the LC9 is aluminum. And porting intakes takes a long time. That's why we extrude hone port them. It worked really good. I do have plans for the Nova. I was looking at TrickFlow 225 or GM Performance Parts. Yeah, you can make those numbers with either one of those heads. Kerbal34, thank you very much. Just a little thank you for putting everything to such an easy read to understand in a real world of theoretical power. A drink of coffee or whatever. I like the whatever. That's awesome. And that's what I try to do. What this channel is for is not for me explaining things in theoretical normally and engineering level stuff. There's lots of sharp guys out there that can do that, like Billy and John Causey probably. But I don't, that's not the explanations that I want to give on this channel. I want to talk to the average guy. The average guy is 1,000 horsepower or less kind of guy, not guys that are building pro mod motors or that kind of stuff that want to talk about very tiny minutia esoteric stuff. That's not my cup of tea. That's not the things that I test. I tested all the stock cams. I don't care that I honestly don't care what the valve events are on those cams, because the dyno tells us what they do. People can argue back and forth about, oh, it needs to have this valve opening point and this and this and that. The only thing that they're doing is taking all of that data and then dissecting it using what they know about valve events, but using that data. And that's, I just care about what the power does. Oh, Paul, you disappoint me. Twizzlers. My wife and my kids, they like Twizzlers, but that's not for me. I'm more of a red vine guy. And I like the black licorice too, which they don't like. So I get to have all of the black licorice, which is awesome. Moon tuned. I've run stuff at 100% duty cycle, and unfortunately I've run it at 100% duty cycle for a half hour straight, also 100% or with 100 pounds of fuel pressure, which I have no idea why that even worked. I did that back in the day in my Mustang because we only had 24-pound injectors and we were running it supercharged in the Silver State. And the only reason that we were getting away with that is because we had 100 pounds of fuel pressure and a really big pump. We had two pumps actually on it. We had one pump, one in the tank pump, which is, I think back then it was a 155, feeding the big Bosch pump. And the duty cycle was maxed out. And so was the fuel pressure gauge was pegged at 100. And everybody said, you can't do that. You can't run that duty cycle because you'll burn the injector out. And you also can't run that kind of fuel pressure because you'll burn the injector out or you burn the pump out. And I'm just telling you that this is what we did. It's good when you don't know any better and you just do it. I do want to have readers' rides. And there's a few places around here in Vacaville that I've seen guys that have cool things. I would like to go talk to them, and I think it would be awesome. And I do want to get over, there's an engine place, an engine dyno over here in Sassoon that somebody told me about that I need to get over to, and I haven't yet. And if you're out there reading or watching and commenting, please know that I definitely plan on doing that. Arthur, you're building a mild 4.8 for Pontiac Solstice. That's cool. That's a cool swap. I run all of my stuff on Holiday or Fast. You can put that motor in with a stock ECU because you definitely can tune on that, especially if you're going to stay NA. Matt over at Sloppy has lots of like tunes that you can choose from and just load up. So he would be the guy to talk to if you're going to use a factory ECU. Rex, thank you. Do you have any questions? Strain TV, thank you. You could buy a 6.6 liter crankshaft and some pistons. I don't want to do that. I want to get a complete motor, because if I have a complete motor, then it represents what a 6.6 guy has and not something that somebody built. I don't want to do that. Rhiannon saying that you could Google the specs for the LY6 cam and that they come up. I don't know how they would provide the specs with the VVT, but it would be interesting to see. With the high compression of the newer DI engines, do you feel that the higher compression ratios will limit the capability of the DI engine to make more power under boost? No, it actually doesn't. The reason that you can get away with that is because they're eliminating the chance of detonation by when they're injecting the fuel. There's not fuel in there for the thing to pre-ignite, basically. That's not to say that you can't get detonation in a DI engine. You can, because a lot of people confuse detonation with pre-ignition, and those can be the same thing. It's just when it happens. One of them happens before the actual ignition, before we get spark. It self-ignites basically with no spark. The other thing happens uncontrolled burning even after we have ignited it at the right time, hopefully. Yes, red vines and also black vines. Geo Stanley, want big horsepower, you could put a torque cam in it and then a mild one, or long tube headers will help with the torque production. Tom, then your H22 just needs boost. It needs boost and VTEC because that's the best of everything. Have you done much testing on engine balancing? I have driven a motor that we put together in our World Challenge car that was not balanced, and I can tell you that that's not good. I've never seen a power difference from balancing. I'm surprised that I need to go back and look at all of the comments from last night on the red vine versus the red licorice versus black licorice on the red vines, because that's a company that makes these. I need to see that contest, because I'm surprised that nobody said, I'm sure there's somebody had to have said it, that technically speaking, black licorice really is the only licorice and red licorice is not licorice. So I wondered if anybody said that. Strain TV is kicking in another 99 cents. But you are 100. When choosing more torque for a 2500 HT with a 6-liter LQ4, dollar for dollar, it is a camshaft. You can't make more power gain than you can with a camshaft. You can build head, which is good. A 706 head, which is almost free, will get you lots of torque. And then obviously you're going to have to tune that anyways. And the LT1. Rosie 87. You can stroke it, but that's a lot of money. A camshaft, yes. The heads, if you're looking for torque, do a mild stage 1 truck cam or a BTR torque cam or something else like that from Texas Speed or Cam Motion or any of the other guys, and then put a 706 head on. If you're going to put a 706 head and you want to do a little bit of work to it, I would unshroud the valves, because that will pay big dividends on a 6-liter. You will, One Bad Z, you will need to pull the heads to do a lifter swap. And the TrickFlow 225s are good, but not necessary if you're doing a mild buildup. The camshaft is really the big thing. If you want to put a head on that, it's an 06 Escalade. Is that an LQ9 motor? Tearing down NP261 for my turbo four-wheel drive Silverado. You're late to the party. We were talking about the LS versus LT stuff. That reminds me, Mark, I need to go see Jerry. I told him I would give him a call. I'll have to give him a call tomorrow and run up to Winters so I can get that intake flange. Yeah, Andy, that's why I want to get a complete 6.6 so that we can run the whole thing, because I want to see what that intake does and what those heads do and what that camshaft does and all of that. And luckily, the guys at Brian Tooley Racing have a Haltech, and they're able to run the VVT stuff, which is cool, and the drive-by-wire stuff. I take that back. I can't remember if they ran. They did run drive-by-wire, but I think that when they were running the LT stuff, they ran. I don't know if they ran that on the Haltech or not. I'm gonna have to ask James that to find out. Tom, I would just be guessing on camshafts for the H22 because I've never done cam comparisons on that motor. But I think what you need to look for would be something that would be similar to a Type R camshaft or one step above that. So something in the 226 range, I'm thinking, at 50. Joey, what's up? Just wanted to give a little thanks. And I personally love all the information on the LT stuff. I'll have a string of LT stuff now going up because when I was there was a lot of testing that they were doing, which was really good. 76 thumbs up for 163. Come on, guys, step up your game. A 5.3 in a 1995 Subaru Impreza. That's really good. That's going to be a lot better than that flat four cylinder, right? Strain TVs going in all in on another 99. $120 grams and 26 pounds weighed up all your 5.3 L. I think you've already, Mr. Beatty, I think you've already optimized the Gen 3 or the Gen 5 L83. I don't know what else you would do to it to optimize for fuel economy. I don't even know that headers would make a big difference on that, but the tune, just optimize the tune, and I think you're on your way. See, licorice is indeed not red. See, I've already stirred the pot a little bit. Julius, I like that idea. Either red or black. I like that. The guy's good either way. Covered in chocolate, nice, in the shape of bullets. Awesome. And I would even maybe I'm not a dark chocolate guy, so milk chocolate or white chocolate. I do like white chocolate macadamia nuts, which I'm looking forward to getting when we go to Hawaii. Deluxe sour apple licorice, also good. And I've even been known to go with the grape once in a while, the purple stuff. Have you ever looked at Big Block Mopar stock balance when the rods are as much as 40 grams? Seems like a lot. I did see, I posted and if you guys don't follow me, you should follow me on Instagram. I did post a post on Instagram because when I was there, one of the guys was picking up a Mopar crank, probably for Freiburg or Dulcich, and he was going to be putting a motor together. And if you look on the balance, it was a welding seam that they put on one of the counterweights, which is, I thought was awesome. I don't know what the largest displacement you can build in LT. We'd have to see how far you can go on that 6.6 liter. Advanced cam's better. Let's see. Advanced cam's better on a standard LSA. I don't know what that question is. I don't understand it. What cam for towing, Keystone Drift, or tell me what engine it is and what the motor is and all that. An RV cam. That's kind of what they still call them that. So it's anything in the 202, 206, even I think as high as 210 for a truck application. I remember in our 454 for our 77 big block dually or 454, we put a 206 cam in it, which was really, really small, you know, because I wanted all that torque. Little did I realize that we could have made a lot more torque actually with a bigger cam than that. The automotive industry is going full speed to high pressure direct injection. Yeah, not quite on the diesel scale, I don't think, but the reason that they're doing that is because of ever tightening emissions and fuel mileage, and it does improve both of those. And 88 days on a turbo for an L59 for a pull truck, aka you're using it to haul. So if you want turbo and you want a low buck one, get that GT45 clone, because that's cheap and it's easy. And if it breaks, you just buy another one for a couple $100, and it will work well on that L59. It's a small turbo, and it should work good, and it can make 700 horsepower. So it should be fairly responsive on that. If you want something smaller and you're only looking for 500 horsepower or something, then a GT3582. I think that Haltech might be a 1500. I'll have to look at the photo on here and see. So we can kind of scroll through there. Lots of moonshine pictures. That was a lot of fun. Let's see here. I'm hoping that it will say I took pictures of the ECU because it's mounted on the dyno. I was pretty impressed by the gains offered by the MSD intake manifold. That was kind of cool, but it does lose power down low. So naturally, when we're looking for it, we cannot find it. Why am I thinking that it's always going to be yellow and then it's not? Flex fuel sensor. Here we go. It is a Haltech Elite 2500. So is that good stuff? Any ideas on, let's see. Dylan's been hydrating. Decided not to weld up my stainless for my 5.3 turbo. Probably a good idea. Safety first. Mark, you wonder if 10 degrees more duration will fit with the VVT. Which application are you wondering that? Philip, thanks for the thumbs up. Which 4.8 do you prefer for NA fuel injected LS valves? They're all going to be the same. I mean, a Gen 4 would be better because it's going to make a little bit more power, but the Gen 3 stuff works really well too. You like the fake red licorice? When we go to the movies, which is normally when I would have licorice, because you got to have snacks while you're watching a movie. You got to have popcorn and snacks and a frosty cold beverage, and I normally get red because a lot of times they won't have black. But I have been known to go full Han Solo and some, and I'm not above smuggling. Gen 6 454 twin CS blow through T56 5-speed 78 Malibu Landau. What mods do I need? It sounds like you already got everything you need. Good heads are a good idea. The right camshaft in that. A T56 you could certainly blow up with twins, depending on what size the turbos are. No shirts yet, but I am working on that. I'm hoping to do that in May. Yeah, Mr. Beatty, I haven't seen. I need to ask Brian to run the stock exhaust manifolds versus headers, because they have headers that will actually fit. Now mine had aimed forward because they wouldn't fit on the dyno because of the ones that we got. But he has a set that will work, and I'd like to see a back-to-back test to find out if there is anything. Normally that there are with headers. And I want to make sure that maybe we just didn't tune the cams, because that's the other thing I wanted to point out. And I did in the video, that to get the gains that we saw from all of this LT stuff, you have to be really, really sharp on the tuning. So yeah, James is good from Short Tuning, and he's doing this stuff for at Brian Tooley Racing. And you have to know what you're doing to get the gains from the intake manifold, and especially from the camshaft. So it's very important that you're able to optimize what's there with all of the tuning. Thomas, they do recommend stall converters, but the interesting thing about this testing on the LT motor with the different stages is they didn't seem to lose power down low until they got to the stage 4. So I think for a lot of them, you might be able to get away with a stock converter. Fascist pendant, the best cam for towing is shorter gears. Yes. Yeah, diesels have been direct injection forever. What is the best cam and heads combo for a 5.3? The first thing I want you to do is not say best. You just need to tell me what power output you want and then what you're using it for. The carburetor makes no difference. The camshaft does not care that it's a carburetor. The camshaft should be matched to the intake manifold, and not whether it's a carbureted intake or an EFI intake. It's just what RPM it wants to run. So if you're running a single plane intake, which is a high RPM intake, and you will either want to match the camshaft to also run at high RPM, or because that's a high RPM intake, maybe you want to bolster the low and mid-range power with a smaller cam, which you also can do. And like I said, the carburetor's not going to care about that. How much pressure can a plastic 5.3 cycle intake take before it lets go? Probably more than you're willing to run, unless you're doing some serious drag racing. David, you've said the reason that Dart put the indicator on there a whole bunch of times. We get it. We get what you're saying. Just listening to see what's up with these new LTs. They're really impressive. I hope you watch the video and you can see the power curve. The thing that's impressive mostly is that how broad the torque curve is on these LTs. And again, there's a lot to think. Most people will point to the variable cam timing, which obviously is a big part of it, but also the intake manifold's really good. The heads are really good. It's got lots of compression. It's got direct injection. It's got a lot of cool things. AG wants a 4.7 cam swap on an LM7. On a scale of 1 to 10, I only took 1 or 2 drinks out of the moonshine when we were doing the BTR video, so we didn't do a lot. Steven, welcome. Join us. I'm glad you signed up. Bunker branding, that's oh God, what's his name? I follow him already because they do really cool stuff. I love all of his videos. It's Demolition, right? Black licorice ice cream is awesome. I haven't tried that. My favorite ice cream is Haagen-Dazs coffee, which is odd because I don't drink coffee and don't really like the taste of it, but I do like me some Haagen-Dazs ice cream, the coffee stuff. Inner chiller test. I do want to test that. I'm talking to the guy now. I think we've had a couple conversations. I would like to try that. Dylan, I have that video up. I have tested the Hooker turbo manifolds. They work well. They fit in a lot of chassis. They're going to ultimately be restrictive compared to real tubular turbo manifolds or even the stock exhaust manifolds, because where they merge together in that Y on the one side, they can be a little restrictive when you're going above 800 or so. Eduardo, a 232, 256 cam with a 117 is going to be soft down low. So it's going to probably want a converter in it. Turbo Icarus. Can I run 553 lift cam with 650 dual springs? Yes. Street and occasional 2 or 3 times a strip, looking for 550 out of an LQ4. So you can get that. If you take a look, I have a bunch of 6.0 videos up with an LY6. It's the same thing with an LQ4. If you put a set of 821 or 823 heads on it and the right camshaft, you'll make 540 or so, because that's what the LY6 made with a stock LY6 intake. If you put a good set of heads, like ported heads, like we ran 225s on it, I think it was up more like 570. Julius, that's going to be determined by 2 things, like how much power you're eventually wanting to make, and then the size of the motor and the wildness of the motor that you're doing. If you have a really small motor, Mahovitz runs into this. If you have a really small motor and you're trying to make 1,000,000 horsepower, then stage injectors might be a good idea, because it's hard to get it tuned down to enough to where you're just cruising around on a really small motor. If you have a 580-inch big block, your injector is okay, because you actually have to spray a pretty fair amount of fuel. If you're running a 4.6, you have to spray considerably less fuel when you're driving around. So it depends on the dynamic range that you're looking. Just got to make sure that my son doesn't need me. I think we're good. Would VTEC ever not be protected by patent? A VTEC on a Chevy V8 would be cool. You could do that yourself and they wouldn't care about it. It's just that you couldn't sell that because it definitely is patented. A 450 cubic inch V10 with 4 valve heads would be kind of cool in a mod motor situation. So Maverick, the cam I recommended, I was shy by 7 horsepower. I can't believe I missed it by that much, man. I thought that I was better than that. Bluebell ice cream is the best. Nice. AG, I don't really build motors, but there's a lot of guys out there. I can tell you what you should put, as much as I would like to take your money. Actually, I don't want to take people's money. I don't want to be responsible for that. Okay, Steven, I'll tell him you're not here. Julius, if you take a look at what the Engine Masters guys did with those 400-inch motors, they made serious power. And if you add boost to something like that, it'd be pretty cool. A 14-pound spring. So you're wanting to go up a lot then, right? If you're going to add a 3-port or a 4-port to that. VTEC isn't the trademark for VVT. VTEC is different than VVT. As a matter of fact, I forgot about that. Thank you for reminding me. The VVT versus VTEC. VVT is variable cam. It just phases a cam. VTEC actually changes the lift and duration because it goes to a second cam. It's a second cam profile. And then the Honda also has VTEC and VVT on their I motors that have lift intelligent. Basically, it's just VVT that goes to the second cam profile, and they're phasing it. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that they're phasing both the primary and the secondary cam profile. Since they're one cam, that's really easy to do. My son, does he have any interest in motorsports? Right now, he's just learning to drive, so he's driving my truck. So he has an interest in getting a truck, which is awesome. And I think he wants a Dodge Hemi. Yes, the Gen 4, Gen 5, and the Alice all have VVT, but they do not have VTEC. 78 Firebird, I like those. The 4200, I can show you what the painted header looks like now, since my buddy Jason just finished that. And he sent me a picture of it. So you guys can see there. Let's see. There you go. Yeah. Long tube race header. I don't know about PRI. Tom, I still have that Mustang, so so technically I still have it. Just putting a VVT on the front of an LT cam. The LT motors already have VVT, so they already have that. And you can't just put the VVT actuator on a standard cam because it doesn't have the oiling to feed the VVT mechanism. Oh, a remote turbo, nice. That'll be cool, Julius. Andy, so for a 350, they would want a 700 carb. That would be fine. We don't normally do that like rule of thumb because you're right. If you have a 350 that is a 250 horsepower 350, you don't need a 700 CFM carburetor. Although if you have a 700 CFM quadrajet, it actually would work fairly well. But we normally go by the power output and then size it accordingly, which is why like on a 454, that's making 400 horsepower or 370 horsepower, which a stock Gen 6 makes with a dual lane on it, I'll put a 650 on it, even though everybody will tell me, yeah, you can't run a 650 on a 454. Yes, you can, because it makes less than 400 horsepower. It has airflow that means that you can run that size carburetor because a 650 will make much more than 400 horsepower. Size the head gasket to the bore size of the head, not the bore size of the cylinder, because you don't want it burning the edge of the gasket. Same thing with big block. Size the big block head gasket to the size of the chamber and not to the bore size, because most big blocks have a really big chamber on them, and then if you put it on a small bore size, you don't want the gasket overhanging that. Let me see if I take my glasses off. Blowfish. Okay. What's your experience on balancing the rotating assembly? I always balance the rotating assembly. You know, if I'm putting together a junkyard motor, we typically don't, but I've never mixed and matched things from the junkyard without balancing it. I know Matt has. He's said that he's upgraded. Check with my balance guy. We're going to measure all that and weigh it and just see how far off it is. If it's only a few grams or whatever, it's not going to be a big deal. Yes, Comp has LST camshafts for an LS 6-liter turbo engines with rectangular port heads. The head doesn't matter what you're doing. What you need to look at is how much power do I want. I have a 6-liter. It has a rec port head on it. I want to make 550 horsepower. I'm going to use this camshaft, and then I'm going to add boost to that. It's real easy. Yeah, Julius, I don't think you need to go to a 5.8 on that. You're going to find that you can make a lot of power with the displacement that you have. I do like pufferfish, Andy. That's one thing we saw when we went on vacation last time. We went on a trip. We took and this was obviously pre-COVID stuff. We took a cruise, and we stopped off in all of the Caribbean and Jamaica and all that stuff. And we did get to see like a ton of like pufferfish, which was awesome. And barracuda, which was also cool. Sentinel, I'm not the guy to ask for transmission stuff. I'm not really a transmission guy. I've only worked on a couple, and by a couple I mean one or two. And by working on them, I mean I put a shift kit in a turbo 350. So it's I'm not that guy. Some guys might still do shop peening. It's just going to change they think that it changes the surface structure. It's supposed to kind of work harden the surface, but I don't know. I've never seen a real test that show me that it adds strength. Brock, what limits RPM is always valve train. Levi, 65 millimeter opening. So I'd really need to know what the inducer and exducer size are. And the exducer would be, if you take the cover off, it's going to be the big side. And then the same thing on the hot side, to tell you, maybe give you an idea of what that turbo is capable of. Look on the turbo and see if there's any designation. Joe, you're 6.2 with twin GT35s. If they're 82s, if the hot side's big enough, they can make 1,000 horsepower. I want to run a carb on my 5.7. Is it a 5.7 LS1? You can definitely do that. Just run one of the carbureted intakes and an MSD ignition controller. Mark says he put LSA rods, which are pretty beefy rods, on an LS3 crank with LS2 pistons. So that's all kinds of hype out there. Needed to add 10 grams to the crank. Okay. Maverick V6 noises. I like that, Lucas. James, is it worth installing E85 on a stock Gen 4 5.3 with a cam? Probably not. I don't think you're going to gain anything. The only time you'll gain something is if you're running, let's say you're running 91 or 89 or 87. And then because you're running that, you have to run less timing than that motor would make optimum power at. So in the video, I talk about that. So if you're having to run 22 or 23 degrees, because you're running pump gas and because the air intake and the coolant temp and all that the thing wants to detonate, if you add more timing, now that motor probably will make peak power at 28 or 29 degrees. So if you add E85 and then you can add that octane, because of the octane and the cooling, you can add that timing, then it will make more power, but only if you are at a reduced timing level right now. Do we ever JB Weld stuff? Yes, we have before. Julie said GTR Skyline would be kind of awesome. But you have an XR8 Falcon. Rob, if you have a complete 301 Pontiac turbo motor, that would definitely be other guys' material. Oh, and somebody just brought up DOD, because that's an interesting thing in the video that I did. The cam that we started with came from Brian Tooley Racing, and it's a DOD delete stock cam. So it allows you to get rid of the displacement on demand stuff, but still run the stock cam. And that was kind of our baseline, which was kind of cool. I have never met Smokey Unick. I didn't ever meet him. What's about LS7 lifters? I'm actually not sure. Does anybody have an answer for that? What makes the LS7 lifters different? I don't know if I would assume that it's changes in the valving, because that's how you adjust lifters. It's how much oil flows in and out of them. I don't know. I haven't never seen any papers written on what the difference is between that and other types of lifters that you would get. So Levi, how much power are you trying to make with that turbo? They were, Dylan, and that's the thing I was talking about. If you can run, like when we run on the engine dyno, we run the motor cold. So with an LS motor, it wants to make peak power at 29 degrees. We can run 29 degrees with 91 octane. So putting E85 in it does almost nothing. But because you have to run at a normal temperature like you do in the car, which we don't on the dyno, you have to take timing away from it. and so it makes less power. If you put E85 in it, you can add that timing back and then get that power back. How do you go about cleaning sticky throttle blades? We clean it with brake clean or carb cleaner, and then you can use steel wool also, but don't take too much, because if you take a look, if it's a factory throttle body, they have a coating there, and if you get rid of that, it doesn't seal as well. What is the toughest and lightest crankshaft made to date? What is the best block for power and still run water in? You're asking about, if you're asking about extreme, like 2,000-3,000 horsepower stuff, I don't know. I don't know what the best one is. Bryant makes good stuff. There's a lot of good guys out there that make. You need to talk to somebody that does that stuff. Tom, I still am not sure about when the next trip to WestTech is, but we're going to get together so we can run some blower stuff. $2,650 Magnuson would be a good upgrade for an LT4. Yep. The displacement on demand should cut more than just one cylinder. I mean, it does random cuts, but it changes the cylinder that it does that to, so that you don't have buildup in any one of them. Is there any other RPM controller going up than intake manifold design and camshaft? Yeah, the cylinder head, if you put a very restrictive cylinder head on it, it won't allow you to make power at a high RPM. Oh, no more engine masters in Australia? What's the deal? Toyota or other companies do make their own NASCAR V8s. I mean, they have a team that does that, but I'm sure that they hired engine builders that are familiar with doing that type of motor. I thought that, oh, what the heck is the Toyota? TRD was doing some of their stuff originally, but I don't know who does their motors now. GM has been making VVT stuff for a long time now. Yeah, I don't know how you would make VTEC work in a pushrod engine. Say what? I'm not JB Weld certified. I'm just a journeyman. I think 500 to 600 horsepower, you're probably fine with that turbo. When do you upgrade to a forged crank? I don't. We just ran, the guys at Brian Tooley just ran that junkyard motor to 8,000 and ran lots of runs at 7,500, and we've run boost on them to, you know, unbelievable power level. So if you're going to go try to go drag week and that kind of stuff, and you're building a dedicated motor, then yeah, put a forged crank in it. But otherwise, if you're going out and making passes and doing that stuff, we don't ever put a crank in it. Yeah, it'd be hard to fit all of those lobes on the cam. Work. If you take a look at, a lot of people talk about the plastic trays in an LS, and they give people a hard time about them, about the, and I had this happen when I was on the engine dyno. The lifters actually rotate in it because they get so weak. The thing that I hate is I swap so many cams that the trays no longer hold the lifters up, which drives me nuts. That's why I would buy new trays if we're ever going to take the head off. But the trays just work for 200,000 or 300,000 miles. So think about how many cycles that is, and think about how much people are not changing the oil and all that stuff, yada, yada, yada. So the plastic trays work very well. Some of the Chinese ones that people put in there don't work that well because they're not very precise about the bore size that they're using, and so they don't hold the lifter very well, and they can rotate. Whereas it's probably a different material. So we tend to get the stuff from GM. Two-stroke outboards, I haven't done much with them. We did have an old McCullough two-stroke way back in the day when we were water skiing, but We didn't do anything other than changing, I think, the water pump in it when we got a bunch of sand in it. I think an LS2 with an LSA supercharger works really well. The LS9 cam is not my ideal cam, but it will make power. Shadow ops. How are tree huggers responsible for them not getting motor trend? Joe, I've never put a double roller timing chain in any LS motor. I may have put one in there, but the problem is you have to grind the front cover and all that stuff, so we just don't ever do it. And since the guys are running to 1 million RPM and running 1 million pounds of boost, that I just don't see the need for it. How much were the VVT actuators limited with the BTR cams? I'd need to ask that. I don't know. I'd have to ask James to find out if they put limiters in them. I've heard that the PSI is so high in top fuel, fuel solidifies. And now, why would the fuel go solid? You're thinking it goes solid because of its pressurized? I don't think that that's true. I think what does happen more often than not is if they are injecting so much fuel into the cylinder. If the cylinder doesn't ignite, it's very hard even for these mags to do. If they don't, there's so much raw fuel in there that the thing immediately hydrolocks. Is the plumbing for VVT external of the block? You mean on the LT motor? It's not. It comes. How do I feel about an LT5 cam and L83 with an LT4 supercharger? The LT4 supercharger won't go on the L83 because the head port is different, and I have no idea about the LT5 cam. I don't even know what it is. Is 39 PSI when hot okay for an LS1 Gen 3 oil pressure? Yes, that's fine. Eden, I don't know what the cost is for pro charging. I don't know what the costs are on those things. Will you ever write a book on turbocharging LS engines? I think my book days are probably done. That's actually a whole lot of work for very little pay. It makes more sense for me to do this stuff, and I reach a lot more people doing this. Tree huggers are worried about the environment, so they take away fun. So they take away programming on the TV. "39 PSI on aluminum block." Is that 39 PSI when it's hot? Is that your idle pressure? That's what I thought you were asking. No, 39 pounds of oil pressure, not boost. But yeah, on the boost too. Can the Gen 4 flex fuel injector support a GT45? I don't know what the flow rate is of the fuel. I have to look that up. I don't know what the stock one is. I don't think Pro Stock has to rebuild their motor after each run. I think that one of the things that they have to do is they may have to change valve springs. The VVT plumbing comes through the camshaft. If you take a look at, you should be following me, Andy, on Instagram, and you'd see I made a video of. I can probably show it to you here. I made a video of how the oiling is in the camshaft that actually goes to the actuator, although I did it in reverse because we had to do it on a. Let's see here. Yeah, rainbow. Okay, let's see, where are you? You see the oil coming out of the journals there? Andy, are you watching? Are you watching? See the oil coming out of there? Actually, the oil goes in there, goes to the front of the camshaft, and goes to the VVT actuator. And then oil pressure is used to control. It has a spring on it, obviously, and is used to inject into certain things and spin the actuator and advance and retard the camshaft. So that's how they feed it. What do you think of the EPA trying to stop from modifying cars? I don't like it, obviously. Have you ever seen piston oil sprayers make any difference? Yeah, I think they're a really, really good idea. That's why Honda's been doing it since, I don't know, the 80s, since the late 80s. Shadow Ops, elongated piston skirts, contact oil, and a reciprocating engine for cooling. So you're thinking that the piston goes all the way down into the oil in the pan? How does it get past the wind tray? Okay, guys, one more minute. I have to get going. Let's see if my son's called me. He's working. He's at work. 500 horsepower, you do not need to gap if you're doing NA. If you're running boost, I would gap. Oh, air-cooled aviation box range. That makes a lot more sense. I thought you were talking about LS stuff. Okay, somebody come up with the last question. See, I need that intro music. Okay, Snipes, you get the last question, and it's about a 3.6 Pentastar in a Jeep Wrangler. Would you dare to use a supercharger on an open deck 3.6 liter Pentastar on a Jeep Wrangler? I don't know anything about that motor, but yes, you can supercharge anything. They build a lot of extra toughness into these motors. Look at a Honda B series. It is an open deck, and lots of other motors that we run are open deck. And you put a good head gasket and head studs and it seals. You might not be able to run 1,000,000 pounds, but you could run like 500,000. Thanks everybody for joining me. Thanks for the guys that supported me with the super chat stuff. That's always awesome and appreciated. More videos coming up. If you haven't taken a look, make sure go check out the video that I have up on the L83 because it's super cool. Thanks guys.